Hong Kong vets were looking for somewhere in the East End of Ontario to create this commemoration. They had looked at Oshawa Memorial Park, but there was no room, and they were looking to honor 9 men from the Oshawa area who, fought in the Battle of Hong Kong and survived the prisoner of war camps. So I decided that year that I would use my grade 10 academic history class and 2 other applied classes that were running at the same time to each adopt a Hong Kong vet. And we put on a display in the gym. We had a plaque that was made with money that was donated actually by another vet who survived the Battle of Hong Kong. And we had a massive ceremony in December about 5 years ago where a plaque was created. It's downstairs in the hallway to commemorate the Oshawa 9. So each of my students was involved in planning, creating, researching, and bringing this ceremony to life. It was one of my favorite memories of teaching, mostly right after the ceremony, when all the students were back in the classroom and we didn't do anything that day but talk about the ceremony, and they were just looking at their faces. They were so proud of themselves. Each and every one of them were almost bursting with how excited, how well they had done. And I don't think it's a day any of them will ever forget. And many of them learned something about part of World War II that isn't always taught about in the classroom. So that's the Hong Kong ceremony. And then 2 years ago, Hong Kong Veterans Commemorative Association approached me again and asked me to help them revamp their essay writing contest. And so the Portraits of Valor was born, where students were a little reluctant to write essays. So we decided to change it and let them choose what they wanted to write. So the vehicle was theirs. They could do a journal, they could do a letter, they could do a diary entry, they could do an essay, whatever they chose, whatever they were strongest at. And so I helped to rewrite the contest. My students have been participating in it every year that I teach. And last year we were lucky enough that 2 of them took home 1st and 2nd place in the contest. A lot of the students after the Hong Kong ceremony said, they didn't realize that these vets lived around the corner from them and they walked the same streets as they did. And so to make it closer for them makes them understand it. And a lot of the students get the aha moment when you make that personal connection. I was always stuck on how difficult it was to get my students to go on field trips. When you add in the cost of the bus and the cost of admission, quite often the cost is much more than many of my students could afford to go to places like the Royal Ontario Museum or museums in Toronto or things like that. And so in my way of thinking, I was trying to find a way, well, if they can't go to the museum, maybe I can bring the museum to them. And so Highlights of History was born, where I invited museums and historical institutions to the board office, and basically they only had to pay for the cost of the bus, and they got to visit 3, 4, 5, learn about 5 different museums instead of just one had we gone to Toronto. My students are very hands-on. Most students today are hands-on. They're all into the gaming, and the trench warfare game was a way for them to put themselves into the play. So they each made a section of the trench, but only a section. And then the class was divided exactly in half, and their section of the trench was then joined to other students' trenches. I had a few students who didn't finish their portion of the trench. And so how do you deal with that as a group when there are weaknesses in your defense line? And so students had to think about how would they protect their own side, but at the same time, how were they to capture the other side? It was a very loud class. I had to warn all the other classrooms. There was a lot of yelling involved. But overall, I think the kids had a blast. I think a lot of the students afterwards said that was probably their favorite class of that year, was doing the trench warfare. So how do you make history come to life? How do you make it relevant to what they do? And so by making those connections with the community, with the world, so for example, Operation Thank You, that was a way for them to connect with a war that was going on right now. And it's one thing to teach students about what a soldier went through in World War I, but what about the soldier today? I think it's important that students not just see what's happening in the classroom, but be able to make those connections with what's happening in the world around them. As long as they get some pride in being Canadian and some, love of who we are and what we've done in the past, then I think my job as a teacher is done. If they can make those connections, you know, when they can walk through Oshawa Memorial Park and understand why November 11th is important, and, you know, understand, you know, what Canada has done for this world, then my job as a history teacher is complete.